good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to this session. My name is Mariam, and I'm very pleased to be with you today to present and share an approach to research, personal and professional development that I'm personally interested in. Of course, 55 minutes is not enough to explore this approach in full depth. But what we're going to do today is introduce you to that session, to that approach, and also give you a little bit of a taster of what it is about. So we'll start with a very brief introduction about this approach, which is called cooperative development. This introduction is based on two questions. The first is, what is cooperative development in terms of its origins, principles, and skills? And the second is, why cooperative development, in the sense that what is the value of this approach to research development? So basically, we understand that cooperative development is a personal and professional approach to research development that was actually started in the field of teacher development by Julian Edge in the final part of the 80s, and it's grounded in the traditions of reflective practice and action research. And the origins of this approach date back to Carl Rogers. Are we all familiar with Carl Rogers, the psychologist? Yes? He developed an approach to psychotherapy by the name, which he called client-centered approach or person-centered approach. And he wrote extensively about it. And basically this approach revolves around the idea that in every human being there is a tendency for development.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Is this the non-judgmental?
Yes.
I'm sorry, mate. I'm also sorry I'm going to have to leave early. I do apologize.
That's fine. In every human being, there is a tendency for self-actualization, and there is a forward-moving directional tendency. We all have an innate drive for becoming better, for improving, for development. So it's very much an internal growth approach to research and development, in the sense that it's not something that's imposed from the outside, but it tries to capitalize on what the researchers already have. In that sense, this approach, cooperative development, actually recognizes that there is no single way of becoming a researcher that is right for everyone. There are different researchers, and therefore there are different paths to development. Also, it recognizes the fact that researchers are always in a state of becoming. In that sense, development is a continuous process. And also that researcher development, self-development is a social phenomena. So researchers need each other, need their social environment to self-develop in that sense. Cooperative development is based on the principle that we learn from the expression of our ideas. We understand or we learn from intellect. For example, when we read a book, we gain certain information, we learn something. And we also learn from experience. For example, we learn how to drive a car, we know what it means to be a motorist. Cooperative development adds a new dimension of learning, which is learning through articulation. So basically, your thoughts, your issues are not just fixed there and they come out, but basically they develop as they come out, in the process of coming out. So it's built on a specific kind of discourse that is neither a discussion nor a conversation, which both prevail in academia. It's very non-judgmental in that sense. And you have normally two people, they work for a regular, agreed upon periods of time. Those two people are either researchers or a researcher and a researcher development staff, depending on the relationship. In that exchange or interaction, you deliberately abandon all elements of argument. And you create a space in which one researchers' ideas can expand in the search of discovery. And that is the speaker. You have a speaker who speaks, a researcher that has a certain idea in mind that whom he wants to develop, which he wants to develop, and in that sense, the other person provides that space for that person to explore that idea. So as I mentioned, we have two people here. We have person one, a speaker, person two, an understander. This happens within a collegial context. So what does the speaker do? Basically, the speaker develops a non-defensive style of talk. Basically, because the other person is non-judgmental, you don't need to be defensive about anything. You speak. You say what you want to say, how you feel it, the way you wish. The purpose is to explore a certain issue or an area of interest. Now, this is not just about speaking, but it is very much goal-oriented. So you have an issue or an idea in mind that you want to explore further. Say, for example, a researcher has a new idea for publication that's not so clear. This is a context where they can start talking about that idea to that second person. Say, for example, a researcher has a problem with his or her PI. That's also a space where this idea can be explored further. Say, for example, a researcher wants to explore the possibility of leaving academia. This is also a space where this can be explored. In the end of the day, the researcher, him or herself is the only person who is versed on their own lives. And that's the power of this approach, that it recognizes, it gives the researcher that agency. Hopefully this will lead to some kind of discovery and a basis for a plan of action. The understander, on the other side, could be a fellow researcher, for example, adopts a non-judgmental attitude whereby he or she puts aside their own sets of knowledge, experience, opinions, with the aim of better understanding the speaker. This is not always easy, because you can always say, oh gosh, what a stupid idea. Oh, I know something better. Oh, I've tried this before and it didn't work. Oh, I know somebody who has moved to academia and is very happy. So, moved out of academia and is very happy. So sometimes you have this urge, particularly if that other person is a colleague, but you deliberately keep that to yourself. And you provide that space for that person to explore his or her ideas. So basically, as an understander, you facilitate the speaker's path of exploration, discovery, and action in line with the speaker's own professional development goals. The understander holds to certain principles. The first is respect. So you accept what the speaker says. You neither agree nor disagree. So if the researcher tells you, I'm going to apply for this grant and I'm thinking about it, then you don't go and say, oh gosh, 300 researchers before have applied for it and just don't waste your time. No, you let that person explore their ideas further. You also have, another principle is empathy. So you try to see things from the speaker's point of view. Of course, this also applies a degree of humility on our part. Again, the researcher, they are the experts on their own lives. We respect that and we empathize with that. And you are sincere about the two above points with respect to respect and empathy. So you just don't pretend that you respect the person. You don't just pretend that you empathize with them, but you actually do so. And you actually recognize the value of that human being's experience and their path of discovery. Of course, there are many other principles, but those are the key principles that the understander holds. There are also a set of agreed moves, when I say agreed, between the speaker and the understander, that the understander can take during that exchange. For example, they can reflect back on you, and this is one of the main ones. So the researcher tells me that they have this idea for applying for a certain grant, so I say, okay, if I've got this right, what you're saying is, or just let me see if I'm with you so far, and you say of course, you don't repeat what the person has said, but what you understood that person to have said. Sometimes when you repeat back to the person basically sees his ideas in a mirror. It's like holding the mirror up for a person. And they'll say, yeah, or no. If it's a yes, you progress. If it's a no, then what is it? It helps a researcher develop clarity of ideas. You can also relate in the sense that you can say, a few minutes ago you said X, didn't you? And now you're saying Y. Are these at all connected for you? Well, this is another way of handling that exchange. Or you can help the researcher focus. You have spoken about X, Y, and Z so far. Is that right? You wait for confirmation. Would it be useful at this point to focus on one of them in more depth? And if you are in your roles of in any role of researcher development, you must have come across this, where a researcher comes to you wanting to check a CV, talk about a publication, complain about workload, doesn't have an office, wants to join a certain research association or a community. So sometimes you help that person focus by asking them to identify one or two or three issues. Let's start with that first. You ask them to choose which one they would like to start with. Setting a goal. Do you see a goal for yourself arising from what you have set so far? Am I right in thinking then that the goal you see now is X? So it's very much the researcher, him or herself, that's really leading this discussion. It's not a discussion, exchange. And what you are doing is that you are facilitating that path to discovery. Another thing is trialing a procedure. So after that person have decided on a goal, they could say, maybe you can tell me about the steps you would like to achieve, to take to achieve your goal. So it's basically making it more tangible. So you have a goal, how do you see yourself achieving that goal? We have to admit that not all researchers have other researchers to work with. So cooperative development can also be used via social media, emails, other forms of communication. It has been used so and proven to be successful. So why do we think cooperative development is useful for researcher development? Of course, you all know that researchers come from diverse disciplinary backgrounds and research cultures. Some researchers work within teams, others work alone. Disciplines have different ways of working. Researchers are also involved in various professional activities such as data collection, data analysis, publication, applying for funding, teaching, supervision, and those are just few of other many activities. And there are so many points of transition with multiple foreseeable and unforeseeable challenges that researchers face throughout their journeys. These are some of the characteristics of the researchers that we have, which really invites for that internal growth model, that it is them that leads the process of their own development. Their context is also generally characterized by ambiguity. And also their career prospects is also characterized by ambiguity. So our role is to support researchers as they develop personally and professionally into the kind of researchers they aspire to be. And I emphasize that they aspire to be. They are the ones who have to set those goals for themselves. They are the ones who have to lead the development because it's theirs. Our role is to support, to facilitate that capacity building. And one form of support is to provide those opportunities for researcher collaboration, for self and mutual growth, like cooperative development I'm just talking about now. Cooperative development can be applied to strictly intellectual issues, strategic plannings of project or career progression, formulation of publication proposals and/or grant applications, other issues of personal and professional or interpersonal significance, but it also enhances trust and collegiality. because you open up to another researcher, and it creates that connection, that bonds between researchers within one community. It also perceives development as a lifelong process. So there's no end to development in that sense. It's not a one-off session. No, it is the researcher's ongoing process of development. And it recognizes that one of the greatest assets of any university is a developing researcher. So that's basically the introduction to cooperative development. We're going to have a little bit of a taster now. But also, before we move to the taster, I want to tell you that on the website, which I'm going to show you towards the end, we have real exchanges with researchers, where you can see the one researcher talking about her own confusion, puzzle. She doesn't know whether to stay in academia or leave. And you can see her developing her ideas in this respect. In another exchange, a researcher is exploring a certain orientation or a conceptual aspect of her research, and she also moves further in her ideas. So under exchanges on the website, because we don't have time to show this today, please go and have a look at these videos and listen to the audio. Okay, so let's have a taster. You ready? Okay, now I know you've been in workshops before, so we're going to sit in pairs, and where you're going to sit with somebody you've not worked with before. Okay? If you're already sitting with somebody you've not worked with before, just stay there. Okay. Right. Are we ready? Good, yeah. Okay, so those of you who are on this side of the pair are going to be the speakers. Those of you who are on that side of the pair are going to be the understanders. Okay? The speaker, I'd like you to tell the other person this question up there. What is the main item on your research and development agenda at the moment? The other person, I don't want you to say anything. I just want you to make the speaker feel fully appreciated and listened to, without necessarily saying anything. Okay? We have 1 minute to do so. Go. Stop. Okay? Those of you who have been speaker the first time, okay, you're going to listen the second time. Those of you who have listened the first time are going to speak. Okay? It's the same question again. The task this time is not to say anything again, but to make the speaker feel that this is the most boring thing. Okay? And you have to show that you were not interested at all, and that had you known that you would come and do this, you wouldn't have come to this session in the first place. Absolutely boring. Okay? You're not interested, you're not going to say anything, but you have to make that person feel that way as much as you can. Okay? It's the same question. Ready? Go.
Okay. Specifically from physics department and maths department to come and take part in the transferable skills courses. The numbers from those departments are the lowest, so I don't know how we can encourage these students to take part. The feedback we also get from those students, those who do attend,
Okay, stop. Okay, let's have some feedback. So, okay, how did it feel the first time? Those of you who are speakers, the first time, how did it feel?
Supported and safe.
Mm-hmm.
Cathartic.
Yes. Good. What else?
I felt a bit awkward.
Yeah. Yeah,
It
too.
felt like a very long time just to be talking about
undivided.
it.
Yes, because we're not used to that. We're not used to. Yes. Mm-hmm. What else?
Felt like a privilege to have someone really be there, focusing on you. on what you were
Okay, so
saying.
it's very much different from this feedback. Yeah. Okay. So you feel that there was somebody it's privileged. It's a bit strange not to have somebody you know telling you, exchanging information with you. Okay, supportive. Mm-hmm. Okay, those of you who are speakers the second time.
Sam was, sorry.
Yeah.
So Sam was too nice to not look bored.
Yeah. She looked bored, but not too bored.
She didn't. She was engaged in what I was saying.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
It's really difficult to continue talking.
Yeah.
it is. It is.
And you start off with this idea of something you're going to say, but then attention, so you kind of stop and can't quite get it out.
Yes,
So you
yes.
lose your train of thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm.
And I think the interesting thing is, although we actually know that this is a simulation, we know it's
That's a
she's
very
really
important
not
point.
being bored. It
Yeah.
feels like she is because of the body language, and so
Uh-huh.
you just can't speak because you just think she's not
Mhm.
interested, but you know she's acting, but it
Yeah.
still doesn't compute.
Exactly. It still has this negative vibe to it,
Yeah.
although she's acting. Yeah, any other feedback?
I feel not important at all. I feel
Yeah.
demoralised.
Demoralized, exactly. Exactly. And I just want to tell you that the second round was just 30 seconds. It wasn't a minute. The first round was. The second round, yeah, it feels like it has been a long time. Well, the purpose of this very brief exercise was to show you the impact of the listener on the speaker. Even if you don't say anything, your body language, your attitude, the way you sit, the way you look, intentionally or unintentionally does affect the speaker. So this is very important in an exchange like this, where you try to focus with your eyes, with your mind, with your heart. This is very important in cooperative development. And although we knew that this was an artificial session, it still came out with these feelings. So imagine in a real world situation. Okay, so the power of listening and the power of attending are crucial to cooperative development.
I think also
Okay.
power of saying in the moment as well. I think one of the things that I got my phone out, and one of the things that drives me nuts is even when people are, trying to listen to you, and then they're on their phone as well. That answering the phone is more important than continuing the conversation, particularly in a kind of coaching or session.
That's true.
It felt quite horrible from a non-speaker point of view, because
Yeah.
I imagine we're all quite conscientious people.
Yeah.
Jobs, so actually it was really hard because it sounded really interesting, and I was trying. It was a lot of effort not to listen
Yes.
and to go on the phone and be bored, because actually I wanted to listen. So it was horrible for the other
Yeah.
side of it as well, actually.
Yes, indeed. But these are some things to bear in mind when we are in exchanges like this one. Okay, that was one taster. Another taster is, oops. One second. Okay. Reflecting. We said that reflecting is an important element of cooperative development. You need to reflect back to the person, like holding the mirror to that person based on your own understanding. Okay, so those of you who were the speakers the second time, those unfortunate speakers, you get now the chance to express your ideas with somebody, the other person, reflecting back to you. Okay? And let's see if we can progress this idea a little bit, although we have a very short period of time, but just for you to have a taste of how it's like. The person who is the understander, what you do is, of course, we agreed that you don't suggest anything, you don't ask leading questions, you don't do anything, but you try to understand, that you attend, you listen, you try to understand, and try to reflect back to the speaker. The speaker has the responsibility to move things forward. So when the person reflects back to you, please do feel that responsibility that you are the driver. I want to progress my ideas in this direction. I want to use that space offered to me by the understander to develop. Okay? Good? So the question is, what is it that you aspire to achieve in your current research and development role, and why is that important to you? Okay?
So we can speak. We're trying.
The speaker is going to speak to tell you. They are going. Those of you who were speakers last time.
Yeah.
Okay. You're going to think about that question, and it is an issue that you would like to explore further. So this is a forward-looking question. We're talking about the future. Now that you work in the area of research and development, what is it that you want to aspire? You want to explore this further. You have a very conscientious, attentive understander with a colleague who is going to reflect back. And this is an exercise of reflecting and seeing the impact of reflecting on the speaker. Of course, because this is a short exchange, well, we'll try, but see if your ideas will develop even a little bit in that short period. Okay? We have 5 minutes to do so. You have to go through this. Yeah. And 2 minutes to pause for you to think about it, and then I'm going to take your feedback. Okay? Let's go.
One of the things that I would like to do is try and see how we can use this for students to come to this department. And in order to find out why they're doing survey, ask them why they're able to give you their inductions, they know about it. If you go to the department, you tell them about what they do, but why we're still in research alone, specifically from the maths department as well as the physics department. And then why is it that those that do attend, why do we get all this most negative feedback from those students? Is it because there's something in their identity that they consider superior to all the other students, and therefore they don't need those skills which they don't see as important? And they value their skills which they have, which are the technical skills, to be the most important things in their careers, and therefore they don't need all the so that's basically what I would like to explore and find out ways to encourage those students and perhaps somehow change their perception of professional if they do have a negative perception I think it's very important because whenever we get the stats at the end of the year, we always have the food students from those departments. So you may argue that, okay, maybe the number of students was that, no, we're talking about percentages here. They're like something like 2%, 10% max. 2% of the students are max department. Physics is 80%. It's a massive department. So first year they have to attend at least 4 courses, minimum requirements, 4 courses. That's the only time they can. They won't go and do any more than that. We haven't from my experience working with the students, we do a residential course, so we get residential and working with the physics students, their perception, they show negative behavior. They show no commitment to doing the activities. The only time they were actually engaged was they asked for a problem solving activity. They've got some equipment they need to go do something with the equipment. That's the only time they were actually engaged. So the feedback was they really enjoyed the activities. All the other stuff was not significant. I maybe want to consider speaking to the EIs, supervisors, find out if they are willing to support the graduate school and perhaps encourage their students to attend. Because as far as I know, the engagement from supervisors and peers with the professional skills is very important. We have seen that there is a correlation between those departments that send their students and recommend them. I acknowledge that they exist, but they don't recommend it to the students. That's what I have seen, because I have gone into physics department and I think the attitude of the supervisors, I found that they don't particularly encourage this, but if I want to give an introduction to the science communication and as science communication, this is really important. You must try and go through some courses. That was language whereas at the other, here's somebody that's graduate school concept.
We're going to stop here. I know you're starting to get into it now. We're going to stop here, and I'm going to give you 2 minutes to discuss this kind of exchange with one another as a pair. The speaker, how he felt, the understander, how he felt, and then we're going to discuss it as a group. Okay? So we have 2 minutes for you. Now it's not cognitive development as an exchange, now we have a conversation about it. Okay? Yeah.
I felt that very happy that you gave me that time. So I appreciated that time. To share my experience. And then once I finished that, I started to questions and getting me to think about how I can arrive at a solution or what I might try. So I like that process rather than going straight into giving me options and giving me solutions. I think the fact that you forced me to think about what I've done and what do I plan on doing. Do I have a plan or not? And I think that is far more effective than I don't usually my experience I can't say I'm receptive from this with you. I don't tend to get distracted, but I think it's really important, especially reflective practice and reflecting on your experiences, trying to break that down and sharing that with people. Is important.
Okay. Are you ready to share our views?
That's the hardest thing I've told you.
Hello. Okay. Feedback. Shall we have some feedback? Okay, from the pairs. Would like to start? Come on. You're smiling. You're smiling.
I was going to say, as the understander, you feel a certain pressure to be certain that you're listening to what the speaker is saying and that you comprehend what they're saying.
Absolutely.
But then we discussed also about if you don't understand and you misunderstand, actually the speaker can then reiterate, and that in itself can be reflective as well and helpful to the speaker.
Yes.
So as an understander, you shouldn't feel too much pressure to be able to follow everything completely.
Yes. Certainly. And if you notice, you also don't have those moments where you're thinking, well, how am I going to respond to this? You know, sometimes we are in a discussion, and rather than listening to the person, we are thinking about what to say next. Have you ever tried this before? So yeah, you don't have to do that, because you're not going to say, you know, you give your opinion in that respect. Yeah. Yeah?
Yeah, pick up on that. I felt quite under pressure to just reflect, and also quite constrained.
Yes.
Because I felt that whilst it's for sure active listening and giving the space and picking up on the cues that were given, there were points then where it would have been useful to stop reflecting and to move forward, or to catch something and to use a checking question or a clarifier or something, which would have then released that cycle. And I think, it was quite constraining. And you said, I think, under pressure or something? Or,
yeah, I think in terms of that sort of responsibility as well to move things forward, and I felt like I was perhaps going round in circles a bit, and actually, you know, that kind of sense of you saying sort of being stuck.
Yeah. So maybe at this point in time, the speaker, the understander, can say, okay, I sense, for example, if you're talking about several things over and over, you can say, okay, can we focus? Or you can say, okay, can we recap? And you repeat to her what she said, so that you break that cycle and she can move on to another point, for example.
Exactly, but so being stuck on with only given, I know it's for the exercise, but just given the reflecting only, which I find very conscious.
Oh yes, sure. You tried. Oh, you couldn't focus. That's true. That's right. Yes. Yeah.
Just correct me.
Yeah.
So we experienced that as a somehow coaching or counseling situation, which is
that's what it felt like.
Definitely needs some concentration by the listening.
It's very
person.
hard actually to listen. I was focusing so much on listening and taking everything in with all the noise that I was alright. I must reflect and say something. But it was that felt very disciplined, like not very necessarily organic sort of thing. It felt very. I was trying very hard to structure what was happening.
Yes, and
And maybe also as a listener, sometimes I was asking myself whether it would be helpful for myself at that point to get a little bit more pushy questions. So maybe you're more repeating. So what do you exactly mean by that? So because I started. So this is not a criticism, but I was running in circles at some point, and then maybe sometimes I was thinking if this could be happening. The thing generally afterwards, I was thinking if this is at a peer level or used at a peer level, if there could be a sharing phase afterwards, because I could also imagine that for the listener, this also makes association and to share similar situations and so forth. If this, I don't know whether this is also foreseen in this process.
What do you mean by sharing? Having a normal discussion
sharing
afterwards?
similar expectations, or this makes so that the listener has the chance also to say what does the things which he or she has heard upon makes with him or her.
Oh, so having a session of feedback afterwards about yes, you can have a session of feedback after it. The other thing which is very important is what you mentioned. What's your name, please?
Joe.
Joe. What Joe mentioned is that this is only about reflecting. But we mentioned several moves. We mentioned about 4 or 5, like you focus, you relate, you help them set a goal. Can you see a goal to yourself from there? What are the steps that you'd like to take? So this is really limiting to the 5 minutes. But of course, in an exchange, you'll be using other things. And as I mentioned to Joe, you could actually move to another step, to focusing, to relating, to goal setting within the same interaction. And you mentioned an important point about the relationship between cooperative development and coaching. They do share certain features, and in other respects they are not the same as well. Feedback? Yeah?
So we started off on a purely reflective thing, and then there were some questions afterwards which were good. But from the reflecting part, what I found really useful is, first of all, in talking about the thing in the first place, you have to explain it to someone else, which means that you have to understand it properly, which you don't necessarily do if it's a kind of thought in the back of your head that you clearly understand because it's the thought in your own head. When you explain it, you have to clarify that. So just saying it in the first place was useful. Victoria then sort of reflected it back and sort of summarised what I'd said much more succinctly and, you know, phrased differently, which I also found useful because it kind of gave a slightly different perspective on how I talked about it. So I'd come up with, I think, 3 points, and I'd ordered them in what I thought was priority setting, but having heard her reflection, it was like, oh, actually, the second 2 are the most important, because without those 2, then the first one can't be in the first. So it just kind of gives you a different perspective to think about what's been said. So just a slight rephrasing and the summary of it was really useful.
Okay.
I think that if you were to put it into place with researchers at an institution, both of the roles require you to be quite vulnerable. Definitely the speaker, but also to a more limited extent the person who's been spoken at. And I can see that would make the whole process uncomfortable for a lot of people, but also that whoever set it up would have to really rigorously enforce things like boundaries and safe space expectations, because I don't know whether it's the same in every university, but there's certainly some people that won't even share drafts of their written work in our university because they're scared that their peers are going to steal their ideas. So actually, saying I'm having this issue with my supervisor, X, Y, Z, that puts you in an immensely vulnerable position. And, most people are going to be lovely and just listen, but there's always the risk that someone is then going to use that to their own advantage. Maybe I'm just incredibly cynical, but that was a thought that came through my head.
I think it's a very important thought, because cooperative development is founded on a relationship of trust. So the cooperative development is within colleagues in a certain place, context, where there is an existing relationship of trust already. Plus, you are not always the speaker. The other person also becomes the speaker. And there are certain points where you go and you say, oh, do you have 15 minutes to understand me? In that sense. So when you get used to that kind of discourse, in a relationship where trust prevails, then being vulnerable is okay, in that sense. And it all depends on the environment. If you have a highly competitive environment where that mostly dominated by different antagonisms and very negative relationships, then no, cooperative development can't strive there, unless you try to create that environment. Yeah, Sebastian?
Christian, sorry.
Oh, Christian.
No problem. I was thinking, so as far as I understood, this is a combination of the format of Rogers, paraphrasing, questioning, combined with some rules from brainstorming, being open, and so I was curious whether this could be connected to other creativity methods, especially since if people at a peer group, they have mostly they are thinking about problems in research and a good strategy and so forth, and most of sometimes they are not so open for this, especially from natural sciences for some creativity issues, but for example using a Osborne checklist with this or some other aspects. I don't know whether you have some experiences with this or.
So basically your question is that does it involve elements of creativity? Yeah. It does.
Yeah, or if you have if there are other creativity methods you can combine this with.
Like what?
So let's assume, for example, there's which also comes from or is derived from Rogers, is this balanced groups or something like this, which is more a supervisional aspect, but which could also be used to make associations for the process, where the colleagues make a more active part. But you could use similar rules to give these association chains or.
There is cooperative development via groups. So we have on the website an example of one speaker and several other candidates. All of them are colleagues, and where there is a relationship of trust between everybody. So you, as a speaker, you have an idea, and you have that exchange with several other people. Yeah, that's possible. And I don't think it is set in stone in that respect, but you try to, it's there, and it could be useful to some. It could be not useful to others, depending on the context. But it has been used in the area of teacher development for years, and we have tried it with researchers in few instances, and in both instances that we have on the website, the researchers have said that they benefited so much from it. But of course you use it the way you wish in that sense. Whether to call it cooperative development or something else really depends on what you use and what you leave out. But the principles are there, as I explained them. If you feel that you want to add an element to it, for example, another person to the group, then yes, more than welcome. Yeah.
So I'm quite interested in how this, you've alluded already to the links with coaching, and that there's a lot of similarities but also some differences. Mm-hmm. And from your description there of using it in a group setting, it seems quite linked to action learning as an approach. And I'm just kind of interested in what makes this distinct from. So I'm interested in where the overlaps are, what are the similarities, and specifically what are the differences?
Between cooperative development and, say, coaching, for example. This is a long answer, but I can be very brief. For example, I am doing a certificate in coaching myself now, and one of the differences is in cooperative development, it's founded on a relationship of trust and collegiality as a condition. Coaching is not. Cooperative development, as a result, actually enhances. When you do this exercise with researchers, it enhances collegiality and trust as well. So it has implications on your own professional context. Your relationship with the coach is different. It's not. It's a little bit of the not collegial. It doesn't have that transactional element to it, but it's very, you are colleagues and you're doing it together based on a relationship that you already have. Another element is that you have that urge that somebody talked about here of wanting to give your opinion, because you share that experience, you share the history, you share the background. In coaching, it's not necessarily the case that the speaker would want to know the opinion of the coach on a certain personal matter. So there are certain differences and similarities, but there are certain differences, but there are also many similarities. Being non-judgmental, it's goal-oriented, it has certain steps, you encourage the person, it's forward progressing, it's very much empowering, it helps people unlock their own potential, and so on. Yeah?
So I was going to say, this is sort of overlaps with what you're saying, but it seems to me very much aligned with the ethos that underpins peer mentoring.
Yeah.
Because that's more of an equal partnership of listening, where you don't really want to impose your advice, but also there is the shared experience, which is sort of underpins everything. 5 minutes?
Yeah. Absolutely. I have noticed the same, actually, when I went into it. It is very much, it's related to peer mentoring as well, with the exception, I'm trying to open this website, with the exception that in peer mentoring there is an element of sharing viewpoints and experiences, but with the cooperative development that's not the case. It's one person's journey that's sort of facilitated by another. There are so many overlaps, yes. We had wildest lows, yes?
Oh, I was just going to say very briefly, because I have to scoot and do my social interest session, but to me it feels a lot like some of the methods that Jamie uses for reflective conversations. Like she uses a triad. So there is kind of a speaker and a listener, but there's also a note taker, and that note taker relieves the listener of trying to remember everything afterwards, and she takes down kind of brief notes of the reflective conversations that are happening, and that seems to really sort of help. We use that approach in some of the workshops that we run at Birmingham to help people prepare reflective portfolios that they have to write. And that seems to work really well, because you have that kind of conversation, you have someone to have that conversation at, but then that person isn't then also trying to remember the things that came out of that conversation, and the triad seems to work really well for that.
Yes, certainly. It is grounded in reflective practice, and many of those approaches are grounded in the same roots. If you go back in the origins, so there are certain overlaps and there are differences. I would like to introduce you very quickly to the website. We have a cooperative development website. Basically, the URL is cooperative-development.com, and in there we have a homepage. We have all the presentations to date. We also have announcements of upcoming presentations. We have workshops. Those are the exchanges I talked about, so you can actually watch the exchanges there. But we also have a community that I'd like to invite you to join. If you are interested, you can send me a short piece about, it doesn't have to be about cooperative development per se, but about the approach of non-judgmental communication, what potential you see this for research or development, and what kind of obstacles you foresee with a photo, and I'll create a page for you there with the others. Up here we have researchers, we have teachers, we have professionals. We also have a section for theses and presentations, and I just want to show you this page under community I was just talking about. So those are the two questions. What potential do you see for the use of non-judgmental discourse in your personal-professional development, and what do you think might get in your way? You don't need more than 350 words, plus a picture. We hope that this emerging community will grow, hopefully for us to be using as a group that will drive this approach forward. The website, I hope, will also be a portal for everything that's been published or produced or presented about this approach. Of course, we can always add to it. Comes back to your creativity. Okay, any questions? We have about 2 minutes. Thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you very much.